It's an evening program, so forgive us. We had it right and we had to come back out, so we'll make sure it works. I am coming to you from my home, not the Natural Resource Education Center where my satellite U of I extension office is, and that is Russell Woods up in Genoa. We have a partnership with the DeKalb County Forest Preserve. So I'm bouncing between my home office over the last year and up there. I will share with you that I bought a large sum of plants last year from our Wild Ones plant sale, like $140, and they were amazing. Now there's some peeking out, my prairie smoke's starting to peek out and things, but they made it with non-gardener care, with naturalist care, which is a lower level of care. These plants are amazing. And with all of you on today, I would highly recommend them if you're looking for plants. My natural space group, a program I did, is on. I think a few of those are on tonight, and they know I'm a dirt farmer and I wait till there's not a weed to be found before I ever deal with plants. And I did it. I did all my front last year. And I would encourage any of you that aren't members of Wild Ones to consider joining, because when you find a group of like minds with good academic conversation, it's not always this, what you find in a group. And I think that many of you would really appreciate the value of a membership with our Wild Ones group here. So keep that in mind. So sounds like a commercial break, but I truly appreciate being here and I appreciate being asked. Jerry, did you record your ghost trees last time?
Yes, it's recorded and it's posted on our website.
Okay, so for any of the people that listen to my programs, you're going to want to hear that ghost. I listened. My son always makes fun of me because I listen to things casually, but I'm writing feverish notes. He goes, "Why are you always writing notes? It's just to listen." I'm like, "There's good stuff in here." I love Osage Orange. So remember that that's available, and probably others are available as a recording, because that was a really, really good program and I appreciated it. So we're going to talk woodpeckers, and I'm getting a lot of phone calls already because spring is coming, and woodpeckers love to let people know they're taking up territory. I'm going to attempt to share my screen and hopefully share the correct one. And I'm scared to death to even push the button, but we will see what happens. All right, let's see if it comes up. Janet or
looks good.
Okay. Shwoo, that's a good feeling. Another FYI, at home I have 2 dogs and 2 cats, and I have been gone all day, so I apologize. They tend to know when there's a Zoom meeting, so hopefully you can forgive myself and them for such. So as we go through this presentation, I wrote this in lieu of another presentation I was trying to write. I went to a friend's bed and breakfast, and they're not open right now because of the current situation, but they're down in the central part of the state near where I grew up. I grew up in Beardstown, Illinois, down in the River Valley. I was actually born Mount Morris, but we moved down there. And they have a place, you can look it up in post-COVID times. It'll be it's Piece of Earth Lodge, and it's a bed and breakfast. And I went there because I had a presentation in the central part of the state, and their cabins are set up so that when you walk in on flat boardwalk ground into their cabins, you have a room, and then you have these double doors onto this screen porch. But the way Tim built them, they are on the edge of the ravine. So once you're in the screen porch, you are in the trees. So I thought I could write extra programs while I waited to go do this program. Well, I couldn't because the woodpeckers were all around my head up in the trees. And I thought, I need to write a program on woodpeckers. This was like 2015. So this program is from 2015. I've picked at it, added different photos over the years, but it was incredible to be in the habitat in the upper part of this oak hickory ravine edge forest and get to witness the constant conversations and the behaviors, which I love to watch. So just so you know, this came about from a situation that was just beautiful. And it's now time to start, watching and listening, because they're starting to set up territories and let you know where they are. They're incredibly chatty, and even kids, the thing about woodpeckers, it's kind of like a weeping willow. My son's first tree was a weeping willow, and he would, anytime we went down the road, I see a weeping willow, right? Because I see the shape and such. And even kids recognize woodpeckers, although they'll see a nuthatch and yell woodpecker. They still get it that it's that vertical climb and that hitching that they do that make them so special. And it's an incredible adaptive animal. So we'll go through and I'll share with you some things that I thought about when I looked at these guys. So many birds peck at things, and I don't mean just, using their beak, but they'll sit and peck and pull and peck. And there's some pictures there. We've got a robin yanking on that worm, and the chickadee trying to hold on to a seed long enough to break it open, only to burn more calories to go back down and get something else. And of course, turkeys pick and scratch, right? The thing that I like about that robin picture is it gives you that angle, gives you the view that it has its hands tied behind its back. That's what it looks like. And beaks are critical, right? They're a tool. When I look at wildlife, I look at their toolbox. What does that animal have that's allowed them to succeed, or they've adapted and added a tool to their toolbox or fixed that tool in a different way in order to survive? With natural selection, if you don't have the right tools in the toolbox, you don't become part of the breeding pool. So I always look at it as that toolbox effect. And the beaks for our woodpeckers are definitely one of the most important and high level tools in their toolbox. So how many peck vertically, right? Well, there's not that many. The brown creepers, which are one of my favorite little dudes there in the top, see that little curved beak? They're going after spider eggs and spiders. They can have all they want. I respect spiders, but I love that they go looking for them. The white-breasted, of course, we have red-breasted. I don't have a red-breasted here. The white and red-breasted nuthatches can go vertically and choose to. And then, of course, our woodpeckers. Other birds can land on a tree. You'll see a robin like hit the tree, or a chickadee, but they can't manipulate the tree and hitch going up and down. They aren't built for that. They're built to perch. So they can't take off. Their tail design and the alignment of their toes, they're just unable to move. So the toes on birds who are capable of creeping are set with to move forward. Number 2 and number 3 are forward, and the first and fourth are to the back. All right. And that's known as zygodactyl with a Z. And zygodactyl is that shape. The perching birds are halix, which actually means thumb or grand toe in Latin, but 1 toe to the back and 3 to the front is the formation of that. And some people may have heard, instead of halix, they have a word, anisodactyl. That's what it is, anisodactyl, which means unequal toes. So that's a perching bird, 3 in the front, 1 in the back. That allows them to grab, perch, but they cannot hitch like our woodpeckers. So right away, the food sources are very limited as far as competition. So the succession is pretty high if the food's available. So we're going to look at the big picture first, because that's how I like to do things. I always have to start with a foundation and then work my way into what I want to know about. So you can see they're worldwide with very little exception. And the pisids are the family, Pisidae. The 3 subfamilies, those, it took me a while to get those. The Gingini, I looked it up. Gingini, I like wryneck, it's easier. Found, as you see, Europe, Asia, Africa. The piculets, if you want picumini, right? Found in the Asia, Africa, and South American tropics. And then our pisids, the Piscidae, that's who are the true woodpeckers. That's who we're talking about today. We aren't going to deal with the old world woodpeckers or the piculets. We are strictly going to stay with the pisids. And those are known as true woodpeckers and are the most common. And that does include flickers and sapsuckers. Okay, so there's no wrynecks or piculets in the U.S. And Canada. We only have pisids in North America. Check this guy out. That is a woodpecker. Doesn't look like a woodpecker. And look at the tail, right? So Europe, Asia, and Africa, they only have two, and they prefer ants. So that tells you right away, the beak isn't exactly what you expect out of a woodpecker. This is an old world woodpecker. They've advanced, right? They've changed, but these guys are still around, and they prefer to be on the ground versus vertical feeding, and they're not built for it. Their tail's not going to hold them up. It's not wedged. It's not shorter and tight, and it's just not going to help. So we do have somebody in our pile that prefers worms. And that's probably got the same tool in the toolbox, or their lack of, that this wryneck has. This little guy, he's from Brazil. So the tropical woodpeckers seen in Southeast Asia, Africa, and South American tropics, there's like 3 in Asia, 1 in Africa, and the rest are elsewhere. This one's in Brazil. I think it looks like a starling and a downy woodpecker hooked up, but I don't know. That speckly look, and look how tiny it seems. The advantage it does have is that short little tail, and it has the zygodactyl toes going. You notice that? It's making that grip with those zygodactyl toes. All right. Oh, I just love these guys. So here we are. True woodpeckers, there's nearly 200, but there's only about 22 that live in North America, US and Canada, and only 7 in Illinois. We get so shorted. We get 1 hummingbird and only 7 woodpeckers. I think that's just rude, but it is what it is, right? So in this picture, you can see we have a flicker up there. We have a fully red-headed woodpecker on the right at full cape. And then we have a red-bellied. And we're going to talk more about all these guys coming up, or gals. So we're still building our story, right? So ancient pisids, they've actually found encased feathers. Look at the years, 24 million years ago. Lisa Johnson, this is right up your alley. A fossilized woodpecker leg bone in Germany, 25 million years old. Right. So I saw, when I went out through Arizona on a rushing trip to move my girlfriend back out to Nevada, nest cavities in the petrified trees in Arizona. They said they think they're 50 million years old. So these aren't a young batch of animal, right? These have been around. So some of the sources I couldn't find duplicated, those 2 at the top, I only found them once. But one thing is for sure, they've been here and somewhat in their physical current form if they could put holes in trees 50 million years ago, right? So we think about that. And some of the, think about owls, our screech owls, they only succeed if there's places to live. And it never said this, and I think it comes up later, but I really believe our woodpeckers are one of our keystone animals because of all the other animals that will reside in those second year nesting holes. The woodpeckers almost never re-nest. They actually, Nelson Mandela, it was like 2012, I'm going to throw a date out there, but I think it's right, had a fossilized woodpecker named after him for his 94th birthday. And I can't remember what it was called, but I thought that was kind of interesting that was an honor for someone. And the fossil was thought to be the oldest in Africa, like 3 to 5 million years. So if you can hear heavy breathing, that's my dog, not me. All right, so generally larger live longer in the bird world. So we know our little hummingbirds, 2 to 5 years, they'll show up back in your yard. If they're born in your yard, they're going to come back to your yard, is typically what happens, but only 2 to 5 years. And I actually had a hummingbird that I knew was by behavior, her goofy behavior. She was there for the first year and she returned the second year. And then after that, I didn't see her. So that traveling doesn't help, right? The traveling with the migration. And a side note, people always feel like our hummingbirds go south for the winter, and that's not what happens. It's their hummingbirds that come to us to breed and nest, and then they go back home. So I just think that's interesting that we're so ready to claim everything. The California condor, look at that age. It's like a human. So in the woodpecker family, you could line that up, and I checked. Downy woodpeckers, 5 to 8 years, pileated, 10 to 20. So your pileateds are our big ones. So that kind of, and that's all dependent on habitat. And, some of these with loss of habitat, the years aren't going to be nearly maybe as long, right? If we don't have the correct habitat. Obviously, they like mature trees, or because of what they do. So here's an example of, I used both males. So there's a 6-inch downy compared to the biggest is usually listed as 17 inches for the pileated, and that's a male. The male has that cheek patch, the red, the male and female in the pileated both have the red crown, but the male has that red cheek patch. In the ivory-billed woodpeckers, extinct to the best of our knowledge still. The female had a black cape head, didn't have the colored head, which I thought was interesting. When I read that. So here we are. I should have asked you in the beginning to throw in the chat how many, we had before I told you there were 7, but here they are listed in size. Okay, so little to largest. And some people will say, do we have a ladderback? We have ladderback. There is a ladderback by name woodpecker out west, but there's a ladderback group, and the flicker and the pileated are the only ones considered not a ladderback woodpecker. If you go into your bird book, you'll see under the ladderbacks, you'll see everybody except our flicker and our pileated there, just for the sake of saying it, because I get a lot of people that ask if we have a ladderback woodpecker. Here we go. So here's your downies. So the downy woodpeckers are sexually dichromatic. For all you plant people, dicot means 2. Right? So sexually, there's 2 different markings, 2 different sex obvious to the eye. And it's that red spot on the back of the head that the male gets, that the female doesn't. And then comparing a hairy and a downy. The hairy is on the left. If you look in your yard and you have had downy woodpeckers and you go, oh my gosh, look at the size of that downy woodpecker, chances are it's a hairy. People that are really good birders, I am not. I have great friends. That's who I count on for identification. They will tell you there's other parts and pieces that if you see them make one a downy and one a hairy, but so much of the time our birds are flitting in and out so fast that I count on my eye and the size. So that short little beak on that male downy is definitely a giveaway to that really long one on the hairy. The hairy looks like a slender robin in size. And really, if you're with other people that don't bird, you can yell out whatever you want, right? And they'll be, oh, not that that's right. Can't say that I've done that. So the red-headed are sexually monochromatic. So 1, right? There's no difference between the male and female. If it lays eggs, it's a girl. That's the best way, right? You can tell internally. Clearly, they could tell if they had one, and wanted to check. The nice thing about this picture, if you look at those feet, look at those zygodactyl. It makes that big X shape when it's on the tree like that. Big feet too. If you look at the size of those feet, that's holding a lot of bird, and it has a lot of platform to hold with. The red-headeds are considered severely in decline, and it's a habitat loss issue, and that changes in the food supply with that habitat loss. We have to remember that animals don't just flip switches to, oh, I can't nest in trees like this, I guess I'll have to now. Natural selection and time. And if they aren't able to adapt sooner than they are extinct, then they stay that way, right? So there's this balance of change that takes a long time for animals. They can't just be told what to do. They can't always make changes like we as people should be able to make. The red-headed has been known to tap duck eggs for food, owl eggs for food. They're in those forests with those other animals, and they tend to do some of those things. And we like to think they're just beautiful and sweet, but these are all animals that are out to survive and out to save their territories and out to fight for space. And quite frankly, maybe they like the taste of egg, I'm not sure. But they've also been known to swallow small nestlings of other small songbirds. So it's kind of wild when you think about survival and the fact that our woodpeckers have the ability, and when they know it, and red-headeds will do what we call hawking. It looks like a fly catcher, to grab things. And they've been known to grab when there's extra food, they'll stockpile it. And they might use an old hole to put the cache in. They've also been known to take live, like when the grasshoppers are thick, to take live grasshoppers and wedge them somewhere where they can't get out. They're still alive, but they wedge them to go get more. So it's not like a shrike who will stab it onto a thorn or something to hold on to it, but it's the same idea of caching them. Kind of like shrews. Shrews do that. They have a neurotoxin in their saliva. So they'll go around and grab grasshoppers, put them in a paralysis, stash them somewhere, because if they're alive, they stay fresh. They don't decay, right? So I know I'm warming up your world tonight with such pleasant thoughts. According to Cornell University, they're the ones that have witnessed this and have studied this. And so I trust them. And you'll see at the end, I'll give you one of the websites of theirs to kind of check more stuff out. So our red-bellied are not our red-headed. A lot of people will say, hey, it's a red-headed with that red mohawk, but to be the red-headed, going back when you have to have that full cape head. The red-bellied aren't near as threatened. They're very adaptive. But when they extend their tongue in their toolbox, their tongue goes 2 inches beyond the tip of their bill. And when we talk about how their tongue works, we have to keep that extra 2-inch idea in mind. That extra 2 inches is in their head, right? They've got that tongue in there and they can actually extend it that extra 2 inches. So these guys are going to be successful because they have a longer tongue in their toolbox, and they will also store food in places for later so they can cache food. European starlings don't like these guys, and they go after them. So they're bigger than a starling, but it's over nesting sites. So if we would start to see a decline, it's going to possibly be from invasive species taking those nesting sites away. So I put this in here because this is a really bad feeding situation. Whether you use, plain wire uncoated or netting, just assume those 4 toes could easily get tangled, right? We have to think about our birds and how they move. They don't know how to unhook themselves. So we want to be careful. That's actually a female red-bellied. I like this picture because you can see the toe spread. You can see the tail tips you've got those V's, and see how pushed down that bird is actually feeling that stick below her and balancing by wedging her tail just a little bit onto that stick while she's gobbling down that suet in there. So she's showing off some of those tools. And here's a red-bellied male, that full mohawk, very pretty. It's, the red on the belly isn't always easy to see, and it's more of a orangish, orangish color, kind of a red-yellow mix when it does show up. Kind of like the color on this guy's face around his eye is usually what the belly has on it that gave them the red-bellied woodpecker name. I didn't name him. I wouldn't have given him red-bellied woodpecker, just for the record. So this one's special. So when I say we have 7 woodpeckers, it's really 6 woodpeckers and a migrant woodpecker. This bird is coming through now. They're tapping trees for the sap water. They'll put a bunch of taps in the tree and they'll leave and go tap some more. And they do a lot of the horizontal lines. They'll do some up and down, but you'll see those holes. The cool thing is when they do that, the holes will actually attract other insects, right? So you'll get ants, moths. So it attracts insects. So they get their protein in addition, to carbs, and have a brush-like tongue adapted for lapping the sap. It's just incredible that they can set the table and get their full meal. If you look closely, the bird on the left is the female. Notice she doesn't have a red chin and that chin strap underneath there. And the male is the right photo, and he has that chin. I love his toes are showing. Look how that grip and that tail's pointing against the tree. Good use of all of his tools right there, or a majority. But they actually spend the winters in southern Illinois, and they may go, not much farther than us and Wisconsin, a little beyond. But it's all weather anymore. The birds don't have to, they'll stick around till they absolutely have to go farther south, as long as they can find open water of any species, open water and food. They don't have to make those long treks that we thought they had to. Northern flicker. So I said this to Janet in the beginning, and I said, that's my favorite. I love these guys. They're male and female. The female's on the left. Notice she doesn't have that mustache. She has the red on the back of her head. So we can't just fixate on that red being the signal, because in this case, they both have the red, but she doesn't have that mustache bar, that cheek patch that's black. And these guys are the ones that are like the wrynecks. They have that long beak. Notice it's a little more curved. They actually eat more worms than they do on trees. They can peck, but they actually go after more worms. And so eating and ants, they love ants. Oh my gosh, they love ants. But if you see robins in your yard and they're really being successful finding worms, it's possible if you have mature trees in your yard and you've seen woodpeckers, it's possible if you look into that pile of birds in your yard, you'll find a flicker doing the exact same thing. But they have the smallest frontal bone. And the best way, I have a picture later, the best way to describe it, it's the bone that keeps the woodpecker's beak from doing the Daffy Duck thing, from going straight up. It's like a kickstand against the skull. The northern flicker's frontal bone is the least developed of all 7 of our woodpeckers. So it makes sense that they wouldn't work as hard pecking into trees because they don't have that ability to take that hit, and they could actually damage their main tool, their bill. And so they will pick mostly at soft food and they will stay mostly on the ground. I had a female, it's been 2 years ago, in my backyard, and she had 3 fledglings. Well, I shouldn't say that, they were flying by then. And she was trying to show them how to get ants or worms, something out of the ground. And I'm watching her, and the 3 kids, almost her size, they were just messing around. And she turned around at one point and just dropped whatever was in her mouth and went over there, kind of half flew, and didn't flog them, but went through this whole dance episode. And they're just like looking at her like she'd lost it. And then she turned and looked at him and spun around and started walking. And they just kind of tucked their heads and started walking with her. They totally got scolded for messing around while they were supposed to be learning how to fend for themselves. It was really cute how she scolded them and they reacted. So pileated. Now when I did my apprenticeship after I got my first degree at Southern in Carbondale, I had the opportunity to do a full apprenticeship at Land Between the Lakes. And I didn't want to talk to people. I wanted to work on the Osprey project, which was working with nesting ospreys on platforms and doing all kinds of science with those. And they said the only thing open is the Nature Center, and you could be a apprentice naturalist. I'm like, are there animals? And they said yes. I said, okay, well, as long as I don't have to talk to people. And oh my gosh, that's all I did was talk to busloads of people. And it was fun. I learned a lot. And I guess I found what it meant to have the floor. And I haven't gotten quiet since, because I could share with people my love for this stuff. But down there, they are pileated woodpeckers, right? And I studied mammals, fur-bearing mammals, so I didn't really pay attention yet to my bird friends. And I got down there and I'm like, oh, pileated, they were everywhere. And I got up here to Northern Illinois and I said, y'all got any pileated woodpeckers? And they're like, no. I said, really big ones? You don't have any big ones? Well, we have a pileated. I said, oh, it's too bad, because the pileateds are beautiful. So eventually, not too long, I figured out that pileated and pileated were the same species. So you kind of have to go with culturally wherever you are and figure that out. The cool thing about these guys, if you don't see them, because they're very secretive, they make holes that are squared off, sometimes a D shape, but often they just look like a big soft-edged rectangle. So if you don't see them, but you see these huge ripped holes, you need to start looking. They're very shy. When they fly, they make a heck of a racket, and their silhouette looks like a bowling pin flying through the air with a crest hanging off the top. But they just almost jungle call as they fly. That's why sometimes people will put recorders out to capture sound, because it's hard to see them. We recently, within the last 3-4 years, have had pileated woodpeckers in Russell Woods, but they require 10 square miles for a habitat range. And I'm like, they're not going to get that. Our forest is so small, but I figured it out. They're using the riparian habitat, the habitat along a waterway where it meets land. In this case, usually it's treed, and it is. They're utilizing a long 10-mile, right? They're using it and probably going clear up to you guys in Rockford and clear down by me, and utilizing those basically kind of like a mini flyway to get their habitat in spaces where they aren't finding it in big enough pieces. I was leaving work one day, and right off to the forest, there was this ash tree, of course, gone from emerald ash borer, 5 inches in diameter. And it was broken like chest high on me, and it was on the ground, and there was all this wood chips. And I'm a naturalist. I've been teaching for now close to 25 years for environmental education. And I stopped the car and I'm like, how did a beaver hang on that high in the air and chew that tree down? Glad I was by myself, because I felt stupid when I realized It was a pileated woodpecker, and it had pecked. The reason the chips weren't the same, right? Beaver's chips look different. They look like little 1/4-inch chops. So for those of you who know me, everybody that knows me is going to be like, oh, of course she did. I grabbed an entire jar. I don't know if I'm in view of you, of wood chips. And they're just these peeled chunks. They're not even. So I knew it was a woodpecker, and the size of them and the fact that it took down a tree. Okay, granted, it's a 5-inch tree, but it took down the tree. So I love to put things in mason jars to look at them and remember what it looks like and think about and study. But I also like to give it a name. And this one is called determination. It's part of my art installation of nature things. So determination. She was after some bugs in that tree, and in the end, she just took the whole tree down. So I was pretty impressed. And I keep watching for them. Every once in a while, they'll come through screaming, but they'll defend their territory year round, and they require a very large amount of mature trees. So let's see what we have here. A niche, a neighborhood, a space. They're considered primary cavity nesters. And like I told you before, I really think they're keystone animals, because without them, other animals wouldn't have homes, and they play that ecosystem creating cavity role. And they also are, for pest service, they're an ecological service. We have no idea how many emerald ash borers they did eat, even though there were way too many to keep up with, or we don't even know, maybe they're solving problems before we even know we have them with different wood-bearing borers. But those secondary cavity dwellers, wood ducks, owls, chickadees, nuthatches, they all need, and many more need, those spaces. And so we really need to think about these guys as a critical piece to what could happen if we lose them, just like in the food chain. We need to watch. And the nice thing is, other than the yellow-bellied sapsucker, they're year-long residents. Migratory birds aren't helpful when you're looking at habitat all the time, because they don't show change that would be specifically from the area. If our woodpeckers are no longer visible, something is changing, or their numbers do increase, that's always a possibility. We know what's going on in a habitat, for good or for bad. So it's really, really important. So why do they excavate trees? Food, mostly. Food, to raise young. In the spring, they're making nest cavities, probably now. And in the winter, they'll often even go make another hole. A lot of my friends, and of course my sister, with cedar siding in the fall, they're not looking to nest, they're looking for protection, when they don't know your cedar sided house isn't just a big square tree. So that's something that can be annoying. This time of year, you're going to start hearing them. They're going to start tapping on everything, because they're setting up their territories, and they use that drumming. And if they get onto some flashing of metal, onto a gutter, it'll go away eventually. Just consider it a type of music for your ears if you can stand it. All right, so here's a hairy. In my first time I did this on our everyday environments, I had this down as a downy, and I kept looking at it, and I finally realized it was hard to see how long that beak was in the hole. So now I have this as a female hairy, and she's looking in another hole, and very well may have made the other one. I had a downy nest in my yard, and we had a hole, and then the next year she was looking at the hole, he was hanging around, but then they made a new one, and then a nuthatch moved in the next year after that. I guess it was 3 years, into one of the holes. So when we had to take down the apple tree, which I didn't want to do, but it was hanging over the fence, and I had waited 3 extra years because they started nesting in it. I got that log, and it looked just like almost like a scoop inside. It was just this hollowed, like elongated bubble inside. The hard part is, for the downies that were in my yard, I took that tree down, and my neighbor had a dead tree, an ash tree. He took it down, and this year the woodpeckers are pecking holes in his cedar siding. Luckily, they haven't figured out I have painted cedar siding, so they've lost their habitat, because we cut down trees that mine was going to crush the fence, and I waited an extra long time. It did break the fence when it did get cut down. It did break part of the fence, and his was visual. He just didn't like it, and I should have said something sooner. 60% reach a year. Well, it's higher because they're protected in a cavity for a really long time. So once they're out of the cavity, the mortality is more the same as other fledglings. But when they're younger, at least, they have a little better chance of getting further along than some of our open nesters. But, woodpeckers are large and slow in the bird world. They're a little easier to get a hold of. Here's another one to show local carpenters for others. I love that little screech owl. It's the perfect size hole. And the squirrels will actually chew the holes bigger. But we're used to cleaning stuff up. And if we could just let some of these dead trees stay and convince others to let them stay, as long as they're not going to harm property or a human being, that's what they need. They need those snags in order to create homes. So somehow we have to quit wanting purity and perfection on the outside of our houses. Woodpeckers would have benefited from Dutch elm disease and chestnut blight. They would have, all those dead big trees, they're gonna be, if we leave some of these ash trees in our forests and can leave them alone, they're going to utilize those as well. So in order for them to reproduce successfully, they have to have a home or they won't reproduce. So the food in the tree is almost exclusively accessible to woodpeckers. We talked about that. There's not that much competition for that vertical. And then they eat an unknown. The ecological service is thought to be in the billions of dollars for what they do to protect us from infestations in our forested properties. So real quickly, look at these traits they have. This is that little toolbox that I love so much. Their head design, how their bill is shaped, how their tongues are modified, their little flared nostrils. I don't know if you noticed, but the downy woodpecker has his own dust mask with lots of extra feathers that the longer billed ones don't have that, but he's slamming his face pretty darn close to the tree. So he has that extra little tool, a little white dust mask. Strong toes we talked about, tail is a lever, and the large second neck rib it's larger, it's flattened to hold extra muscle attachment because our muscles are wrapped and hold on to bone, right? So they actually have an adaptation, a physical change that's unique to them that gives them that extra power and extra strength in their upper neck there. Very cool. So the head design, we don't have to read every one of these, but basically, you guys, the force is insane, right? The striking speed is, as you can see, 20 to 24 feet per second, and then they're stopping. I mean, it's just like jamming your face into something. And some people, some of the things I read, well, their brain's so small, it doesn't matter. Well, that doesn't make any sense because if the brain's small, it's going to be swinging around in there that much more. So there's other things they believe in the design. And part of it is the protractor muscle where the bill meets the skull, right? Where it would attach to the skull. It contracts just before impact to absorb the hit and keep the bill in place. The lower bill is a little bit under the upper bill, so you don't get a catch, right? That helps. And then in that frontal bone that we talked about, that the flicker doesn't have a very well developed frontal bone. So when it hits the lower bill's force, it's already being pushed elsewhere. So that frontal bone can take that hit, and it's the physics is that hit and spread. So you're not just taking it straight to like a forehead, right? It's fanning it out and then into the neck muscles and helping. Is what they think, is what they're thinking. So that makes sense, so that the force is directed, around the head. So it's not just going to slam in, it's going to go hit and wrap around. So here's a little picture, and I drew an arrow in there to point right there. So right there's that little connector of that frontal bone. My next picture is my favorite. I'm so love this. So just like a hummingbird, the tongue is attached in the top of the head. In this case, they're showing it over the right nostril. So it's like a single wrapped piece. And as it comes over the top of the skull, it's two pieces of muscle. And then right behind the skull, right in this back, there's a hiatal bone. It's a flexible bone. It's not very big. And the muscle then attaches to the other end of it. You can see in the bottom picture where you can see the pink tongue attached. So the hiatal bone is flexible. And so what happens is when the muscles contract, it basically shoots the tongue out. And when they relax, the hiatal bone relaxes back into a bigger C shape. So sometimes some scientists believe that when the tongue tightens before impact, that it constricts the jugular and the neck, keeping as much blood as possible in the head, is what they think, giving it even more cushion. I don't know if that's true, but that's what they're thinking. But the fact that this tool knows that it's going to peck a hole, these birds aren't pecking and wasting energy pecking a giant hole to get a tiny insect. They're pecking a hole just big enough to see it. And then they're looking in there, and when they see it, they're moving and they're putting their beak just open enough to shoot that tongue in by tightening the muscles, pushing on that hiatal bone, slamming that thing in. And look at the tongue. This isn't every tongue. Now, this is very similar to a hairy woodpecker. Don't ask me how I know that. Actually, I had one hit the window and I had to look. It was dead. And they have this harpoon. Some of them only have 2 spikes, but then they go in after a beetle or a grub of, a baby beetle. It's like a marshmallow and a fish hook. You just poke it and out it comes. This fascinates me to no end. And for those who know me, they get it. It's just the fact that this design works for this specific group of animals, and the fact that it's, all the way up over the top of the head. So it's coming under the chin in 2 pieces, and it inside that back part of the mouth, it's connecting as one. The hummingbird has the same kind of thing, and it's connected over. The Anna's hummingbird out west, it all attaches in behind the, I think it's the left eye. Why would a tongue connect behind an eye? I don't know. I always wonder if she winks when she's nectaring, but nobody's been able to tell me for sure. So keep this in mind. This is a success. This is something that if something happens to their tongue, that's why we ask you when you feed woodpeckers that you use coated wire. This tongue is wet. It's sticky. And if you have anything wet and fleshy and sticky and it's cold out and it hits metal, it's going to stick and rip their tongue off. They're dead. That it's over. They're not going to make it because one of their major tools is missing from their toolbox. There's that little dusk mask. You see how fuzzy that is? If you had a short bill and were smacking into a tree with all the stuff, you'd want your eyes protected too. I love that. Here's those zygodactyl toes again. I just wanted you to see there's a female red-bellied on the right. Notice the mohawk doesn't go all the way to the bill. And then the male, pileated, could be a pilated. There's your zygodactyl word. And then the pygostyle or tailbone. These vertebrae are fused. It works like a plow. So the pygostyle is Greek for rump pillar. So I don't want to have a rump pillar, but they need it. And that whole last section of the caudal vertebrae, they're all fused. They don't flex like a perching bird might flex. This one is firm. So when they bend that down along with that kickstand tailbone, that at the very end, they're in. They can move their feet and hitch their way. They call it hitching when they move up and down a tree. It's fascinating. So if you're ever out and you see a bird flying and it looks like they're hugging themselves, the kids, when I work at summer camp, look at that bird, he's hugging himself. And he said, it's a woodpecker. And how do you know? Well, that tends to be their flat bounding flight pattern. And if you think about it, if you're a bird and your wings are open and you shut them, you're gonna fall, right? And then you open them, you're gonna catch the air and go back up. So when they shut their wings, they're causing this pattern. And very often it'll be a woodpecker. And here's the thing, if you're out somewhere and say, oh, look at that woodpecker fly by. I'm like, oh, how'd you know? Like, well, just look at it. If you're wrong, nobody's gonna know. The bird's gone, right? Tricks of the trade, my friends, tricks of the trade. Now you're never going to believe anything I ever say to you. So think about this too. So I started thinking, I wonder how they sing. What do they sing? I hear them chirp kind of, but they don't. They call, but they don't have a song. They're not a songbird. So they call year round. You'll hear them. I always say the red-bellied always sound like they're going chunk, 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 chunk. Right? And sometimes they laugh at you. There's some laughing going on. And then the drumming I talked about coming this spring, it can cause some damage, but it will get over. It will end. You don't have to take them out. They are protected, right? The federal government protects all the birds in the nation because they can migrate or move, whereas each state gets to choose what happens to the rest of their animals. All other animals are under the jurisdiction of the state they live in, but birds are protected by the federal government. And I know some of you know not the sparrow, not the English house sparrow, not the starling, and not the rock dove, right? That's the pigeon. Those aren't protected because of their invasive title. So keep in mind, you might be hearing more about this, but you're not going to hear them singing. Feeding woodpeckers, remember, I put it at the bottom, birds can feed themselves. I feed the birds. My girlfriend does not feed the birds. She's a friend of mine that's another naturalist. she said, well, what do we talk about? Because we were talking about birds. She goes, I don't believe in feeding the birds. I said, I like feeding the birds. She goes, well, maybe that's our conversation. They don't need us. And there is the potential that we're making a difference in the world by keeping birds alive that shouldn't be, or we're killing more birds with eye infections that because they're feeding together. You have to make that decision. But I'll tell you what, in this last year, I definitely told people they should be feeding the birds. We had so few joys that I think that people want to care for things. And we have that innate need to do something for somebody, even if it's a bird. And I think it's okay that we fed the birds. And I keeps my two cats fully occupied because I have my feeders very close to the windows. So when they take off and hit the window, they don't die. But if you want to feed them specifically, there's the short list, but they love sunflower seeds, those black oil sunflower seeds. They can eat them all day long. And if you notice when birds are feeding, the woodpeckers, they don't stay like your grosbeaks, like cardinals and your finches that have a large beak, and your grosbeaks as they come through, the rose-breasted grosbeaks. They can't crack the seed on the spot. Those big woodpeckers with all that beak have no muscle power in their jaw area to crush seeds. So they have to fly somewhere, wedge it, and peck it open, every one of them, just like a chickadee has to. They cannot crush it open. So think about that when you're feeding them, what you want them, for them to have as far as the fat. The best fat for the dollar is your black oil sunflower seeds for everybody. And the suet, of course, is easy pickings as well. Might get other birds that you don't want, but you'll get something. Dealing with them, spring, you're going to hear drumming, nesting in spring and summer. If you have a large forest, start walking around and looking. If you know where there's a large forest, they're going to be setting up shop. And there'll be some of the red-headed woodpeckers go really high to nest. I've had them nest a lot, strangely, in some of our wild black cherries in Russell Woods, which, they always say oak hickory, upland, kinds of things. And so keep in mind, if they want to nest somewhere, they just might, right? So in the fall, they're going to want a winter home. So that's when they might hit up a house. I can't imagine if they get in far enough where they feel the heat from your house and the insulation, then you'll have a hard time fighting them off possibly. And there's actually in other countries, they'll call them, they'll call the numbers, kill them because they're actually putting holes in irrigation. There's a place in Israel where they're tearing apart the irrigation. They had to get rid of them. And so ours aren't doing that much damage, but they can do some damage to your house. So what do? You can put up some netting, but you might have to free a woodpecker, right? If they get tangled. Anything that moves, don't worry about the plastic owls. They're smarter than that. When the owl doesn't move for a while, if you could get an owl that like turns and moves and makes something, that would help. But I see a lot of plastic owls with like broken heads and stuff because nobody ever brings them back in, and it's kind of odd. So really it's a matter of just trying to make something that can move and delay them, cover holes immediately when they start them so that they don't continue, because they'll do some test spaces. You want to get rid of that and cover it with something. My neighbor actually matched his paint and got little metal pieces of metal and tacked it up. And from my house, I can't see them. He blended the paint and then they couldn't finish. And we're hoping now that they're going to go back to the back. He put up a nest box. I said, the chances are you're going to get sparrows, but we'll try to provide something. So this is here for you. I told you I'd give you the Cornell All About Birds is amazing. They've done a great job. U of I does a lot of bird study. We just don't have a place yet that's as together, with all this information. So you can hear all the different calls. You can learn about their nesting habits, how much are in there, how many eggs in the clutch. The wildlifeillinois.org is the replacement site for what used to be Living with Illinois Wildlife. So you can find out a lot about what to do with woodpeckers knocking on the house and things like that if you go to that site. If you just punch in wildlifeillinois.org, you'll get that one. And then if you want to learn all about birds.org, that's how I remember it. You just put in, I want to learn all about birds and wildlife Illinois in Illinois. So Wildlife Illinois. So those are your sites, and that's it. I know that was a lot for nighttime, and I don't even have a watch on my person anywhere. But if we have it looks like we still have a large number of people, I'm going to stop sharing, and maybe we can there's
Yeah,
any
anybody
question.
has a question or comment for Peggy, or you want to share? Just unmute yourself and speak up, because we have so many people on, I wouldn't be able to identify you. Francie,
Francie.
you have to unmute yourself, Francie.
Okay,
There
now,
you go. Yeah, I can hear you.
good. My favorite bird is the sapsucker. I watched it, or a bunch of them come through one spring, and the hummingbirds were right with them and were using the holes that the sapsuckers. I also saw chipmunks use them. Some moths used them, butterflies used them. I mean, even a chickadee was trying to
Yeah.
work on it. Yeah.
Right. So imagine if we lost that one species, how many
Yeah.
animals that would affect.
Yeah, I worried about that. Also, I don't have, to my feeder comes a male downy, and it doesn't have a left foot. It has a left
Wow.
leg.
Wow.
And I've seen it all winter. And since it has a little bit of difficulty, but I believe it must have been born that way to be able to adapt to
Yeah.
feeding.
It may have. Yeah. That's fantastic. You've
Yeah.
got you've got a diversity coming to the dinner table, and people with disables there. You've got a really great open space. You're covering all the points. That's fantastic.
Any
Thanks
other
for sharing.
comments or questions for sharing? Thanks, Francie.
Hey, Peggy, it's Janet.
Hi, Janet.
The other night on WTTW Nature, there was a program, I think they called it like Little Creatures or something like that. But anyhow, they showed in some area where the woodpeckers would be tapping holes to get sap for themselves, but also hummingbirds that were arriving early were actually eating the sap coming from the trees. It sustained them until the natural flowers were providing nectar. It was just fascinating. I had never thought that two species would be benefiting.
No, until you and Francie said that, I hadn't thought about that, but it makes sense because the males come ahead of the females to set up territory, and it becomes a big battle. And there's no flowers. I sometimes will buy a non-native flowering basket just to hang, in case there's something. I don't know what the caloric intake is, but yeah, on that note, you guys, April 15th is the date that you should have your hummingbird feeders out by if you want to, I put that out and can justify that I'm helping the guys while they're trying to get a territory, give them something to eat. So, but that's interesting. I had not heard that from about the hummingbirds, but it makes sense.
It sure does. Yeah.
And maybe that's why they tap so many holes, right? Because they're not getting everything that they set.
Right.
And everybody else is taking all the food.
Anyone else?
I had a quick question. Pam Richards here.
Hi, Pam.
Hi, Jerry. I don't know if you remember us from
Sure.
Defenders. Good to see you. Okay, we have all 6 the peckers around our woods area where we live, and they're here all year. But for some reason, the red-headed seems to disappear. Like right now, he's been gone. They have been gone for a while, and it seems to happen every year. I don't know if they go somewhere and nest and come back or what's going on.
Yeah, they're probably setting up territory. They're pretty shy, and all these woodpeckers are super territorial, so they have to spread out, and they may require a larger territory than the others. So they want to get as far away as they can to be successful. Because if they're tapping eggs from other things, they're gonna have to defend themselves. So I noticed that at the Nature Center in Russell Woods, that we'd have a red-headed woodpecker pair. And if you didn't figure out where they nested, you didn't see them all summer. They make sure they hide somehow. They're kind of, and the pileatids are the same way. If they land on a tree and they think that there's anybody, they go to the back of it. So there's some protection there for their own safety and population. I think that's my opinion strictly.
Well, thank you.
I know one year when I was still living out in the country, we had a dead tree next to the driveway for a while. And there was a pair of red-bellied woodpeckers that nested on the side of the tree. And then farther up in the same trunk on the other side was a pair of redheads.
Whoa,
in the
that's
same tree.
amazing.
Yeah. And there was a little competition, but they both fledged babies.
Wow, that's so
Really good
awesome.
fight.
Yeah, that's saying that really kind of maybe that there's such a big population. Maybe you had a really strong area population and not enough trees, to go around, and they had to come up with a contractual deal.
Yeah.
You stay on your side of the tracks, I'll stay on this side.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it was a fun summer to watch that.
Any more questions or comments? Thanks, Lisa.
I've got one, Jerry.
Yeah,
My daughter wanted to watch this program and is in the car driving tonight to northern Wisconsin. Is it going to be on the website?
yes, we remembered to record it tonight.
Woo!
Been recorded,
Woohoo!
being recorded, and it will be posted on the website sometime next week because it takes a little while to convert it to a MP3, but it will be on the website.
MP4.
So that's Wild Ones. What's the website?
It'll be on our Wild Ones website, Rock River Valley. And you'll see it under the calendar link.
Okay.
Yep. Give us a week or so because it has to be converted and then we have to send it off to our web guru who will then post it to the website.
So speaking of our website, remind you again that the 2021 native plant sale list and order form will be on the website shortly. If not tomorrow, it'll be there next week. And we'll be sending out the order forms to those of you who asked to get mailing. And if you order plants this year, you will also get a free native garden design handbook that was produced by the national office. And they provided us with copies for everybody. So if you order, you'll get one of those. And remind you again that we have some new books, including The Common Spiders of North America, which was referenced last month for our spider program, and The Pollinator Victory Gardens. And Doug Ptolemy's new book is coming out, and we'll have that as soon as we
Nice.
get it. So thank you, Peggy.
Yeah, thanks for
Very-
having me. I
very
had fun.
interesting. We got lots of good comments from people, and we had, I think, a record number of people tonight. So that's good.
Yeah. Fun. Good to be here. And thanks everybody for giving up an hour of your evening and keep your eye on Wild Ones and get involved. And
Yeah, and when you get a call from Fiona asking to volunteer, please say yes for the plant sale. Okay, we're going to end the meeting then.
all right. Thank you, everybody.